Greeks call their country Hellas or Ellada, and its official name is the Hellenic Republic. They call themselves Hellenes. Why then do we call the country Greece? Because Romans used the name Graecia or Gracia in Latin. The country population is relatively small. There were about 11 million people in Greece in 2018. The recorded Greek history begins about 776 BC, the year of the first Olympiad. One of the oldest works of the Western literature is Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, dated to around the 8th century BC. Ancient Greeks had a profound effect on European civilization. Greek archaeological museums are full of findings of much earlier Bronze Age Minoan civilization from 2700 to 1450 BC and so-called Mycenaean civilization running from 1600 to 1200 BC. It's followed by the Greek Dark Ages from around 1100 BC to the first independent Greek states in the 800 BC. Next comes the Archaic period from 800 BC to the Second Persian invasion in 480 BC. Following the Greek victory over Persia, which resulted from an unusual unity of the city-states, Greece entered its classical period spanning from 500 to 300 BC. Then, of course, was the Roman period. It was followed by the 1,000 years of Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire. Then came the Ottoman Turks, and finally in 1830, Greeks won their independence. Earthquakes and barbarian invaders took a toll on the beautiful creations of the classical world, but most of the systemic destruction was caused by the religious intolerance of early Christianity. Taking idolatry prohibition to an extreme, the newly converted masses and their leaders took the classical world apart, stone by stone, statue by statue. The Byzantines were especially cruel when even the early images of Christ and his apostles were prohibited during the iconoclast periods. As a result, most of the unbelievably beautiful marble statues and busts discovered by archaeologists feature faces with cut-off noses. There is great effort in Greece now to restore and preserve their ancient history, which will no doubt continue for many generations.
To more or less follow the historic chronology, we are first going to the island of Crete, or Crete as Greeks call it. We are visiting a Bronze Age Minoan civilization palace in ancient Knossos, near the present-day Heraclion. The site of the palace has been called Europe's oldest city. Here is what some of this site looks like now, and here is what it may have looked like in 2000 BC. Some of the palace fragments have been restored to give a glimpse into the past. The throne room was rather modest then. And this is probably one of the oldest Greek theaters, which according to historians was used only for religious events. And since it is the oldest theater, then this must be the oldest street, so says our guide. Among some of the earliest European paintings are several famous 4,000-year-old frescoes found at Knossos Palace. The copies are at the site, and the originals are in the Heraclion Archaeological Museum. They are known as Water Carriers, Prince of Lilies, the Cretan Bull, possible images of shields, tethered griffins, bull leaping, and of course, the dolphins. In the museum are wonderful examples of clay jars, amphoras, and cups. This one is especially interesting. And this is a tabula or backgammon type game. Famous depiction of a bull head. The plaques at the museum are reminding us that we're looking at 3,000 to 4,000-year-old artifacts. The richly ornamented sarcophagi are quite small. Turns out that Minoans were buried in a fetal position. And here is the famous 6-inch Hephaestus disc. The disc is covered on both sides with a spiral of stamped symbols. Its purpose and meaning remain disputed, making it one of the most famous mysteries of archaeology. Before returning to our ship, we are stopping for a cone of ice cream and some Greek music. The nearby young Marxists are agitating for their candidate. We're sure that our own AOC will show up, but she doesn't. She's probably too busy with her Green New Deal.
If one travels from Athens west and then south to the ancient town of Mycenae, one first needs to cross the Isthmus of Corinth, which connects the Peloponnesus Peninsula to the central part of the country. The isthmus is cut by the famous Corinth Canal. Several rulers of antiquity dreamed of cutting through the isthmus. After the first failed attempt, a simpler overland portage road named the Diolkos was built. Along this road, ships were towed from one side of the isthmus to the other. The remnants of this road is still visible today. An ancient prophecy states that anyone who proposes the canal would be met with illness. And so several rulers attempted to build it, including Caesar, Caligula, and Nero, were met with violent death. Nero, who removed the first basket load of soil in 67 AD, went as far as finishing almost 800 yards of the canal, but the project was abandoned when he committed suicide. But apparently the prophecy only applies to the ancient times, because the canal was finally built in 1893. It's a very interesting piece of engineering. We are lucky. For our visit, 2 small boats are moving through the canal.
Next on to Mycenae. Just south of the Corinth Canal, we are visiting the ancient site of Mycenae, which gave the name to an entire epoch in Greek history. Spanning from 16 to 1200 BC, it is called Mycenaean civilization. The archaeological site has some structures at the bottom of the hill, and a citadel and a palace on the hill above. Below is a lion Tholos tomb. The description at the site dates the tomb to 1500 BC. The structure, a circular building with a canonical vaulted roof, is estimated to be 15 meters high. The uphill road passes through the famous Lion Gate. It was erected around 1250 BC. The Lion Gate is a sole surviving monumental piece of Mycenaean sculpture. It is the only monument of Bronze Age Greece to bear an iconographic motif. Further up is the grave circle A for the royal burials. Archaeologists found many objects accompanying graves. Among them is a famous mask of Agamemnon. The ruins of the palace itself are anticlimactic, but the view from the top is great. And now down to the next set of ancient rocks.
We are going to Athens to look at the inheritance of the Archaic and the classical periods of Greece. First, Acropolis. Here's the view of the southwestern side of Acropolis from the Hill of Muses. It's a large, tall, flat-top rock in the middle of the city. And this is the Google Earth version of the southern slope of the rock. Now, from the west on the Areopagus hill, together with what feels like several hundred young people, we are looking at the western slope of Acropolis. Following the Persian invasion and destruction of Athens in 480 BC, the sacred buildings and temples from the Archaic period lay in ruins. After the Greek victory, the next generation began the rebuilding. Greece was entering its classical period. So it's the next morning, and to the top of the rock we go. The monumental gateway of Acropolis, called the Propylaea, was built in 432 BC. Here it is in the morning against the rising sun. Around 420 BC, to the south of Propylaea, The Athenians erected a temple to their goddess of victory, the iconic temple of Athena Nike.
And now, the Parthenon. It is regarded as an enduring symbol of Greece, Athenian democracy, and Western civilization. It was built between 447 and 438 BC. The sculptures of the east and west pediments, a triangular-shaped gable between the roof and the columns, were finished 6 years later. We are now going around the temple to see its eastern side. The Parthenon is a Doric temple with Ionic architectural features. Throughout the classical world, there are structures which are called Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, Tuscan, or Composite. This is usually associated with the capital order, the top of the columns within the structures. The remaining of the sculptures of both pediments of the Parthenon are at the British Museum and the Acropolis Museum. Here are the scaled reconstructions of the east and west pediments. The eastern pediment depicts the birth of Athena, while the western depicts the dispute between Athena and Poseidon for the possession of their beloved city. Through the centuries, Parthenon served as an Orthodox and a Catholic church, and then as a mosque. Because of religious occupants, the structure was more or less intact. However, when the Venetians laid siege to the Acropolis in the 17th century, the Parthenon was used as a munition store and therefore bombarded. The bombardment resulted in an explosion that destroyed a large part of the temple. North of the Parthenon is the Erechtheion. The temple, built between 421 and 406 BC, is divided in two main parts. The east, devoted to Athena Polias, protector of the city, and the west to Poseidon Erechtheus. Erechtheus was one of the first kings of Athens in Greek mythology. The temples contain several sacred objects worshipped by Athenians. The originals of the famous Caryatides, or Carai, female sculpture supporting the southern part of the temple, are in the Acropolis Museum. By the time we're ready to leave, the crowd at the top of the rock thickens.
After walking out of Propelia and turning left onto a narrow pass south, we see the theater of Herod's Atticus. It was built in Roman times in 161 AD by the Athenian magnate in memory of his wife. It was restored in 1950 and is now the main venue for the Athens Festival. Going further down and to the eastern end of the southern slope, we reach the theater of Dionysus, the god of plays and wine. The theater, which seated 17,000, was the place of the ancient Athens' biggest theatrical celebration. The structure dates back to the 4th century BC and is considered to be the birthplace of Greek tragedy. All the rooms of the Acropolis Museum, which hold Acropolis findings, are open to photography, but a hall with the objects from an earlier Archaic period, including several female statues and the famous 4 horses, is not. We only managed to sneak in a couple of shots. But there is also the other side of the Acropolis, its northern slope. In ancient times, many shrines were nestled among the steep cliffs, caves, and pathways. The area at the bottom of the rock, called Anaphotika, was settled at the time of Greek independence by workers of the Cycladic Islands, and later by the refugees from Asia Minor. Now there are only a few houses remaining, the rest are abandoned. Acropolis is a very interesting and beautiful sight. Here are a couple of more views at night and a song at the foot of the rock.
Το τρένο για την Κατερίνη, το ευρύς μήνας δεν θα λύνει. Σε βρήκα πάλι ξαφνικά να πίνεις σούζο στου Λευτέρη. Νύχτα δεν θα έρθει σ' άλλα μέρη να έχεις δικά σου μυστικά, να έχεις δικά σου μυστικά και να θυμάσαι ποιος τα ξέρει, νύχτα δεν θα έρθει σ' άλλα μέρη.
The population of Athens is over 3 million, and like in every large city, the sights and sounds vary. But when we are walking the streets, it appears that there are as many motorcycles and mopeds as there are people. Our modest hotel, Acropolis Ami, is a 20-minute walk from Acropolis. It has tiny rooms, tiny beds, tiny bathrooms, and even more tiny Wi-Fi speed. But it has wonderful front desk people, great breakfast, we do not want to stop eating in the morning, and a spectacular view balcony. We buy our bread and groceries at the local stores around the corner and enjoy our dinner with a view.
Hi, we're here in Athens and we've spent 8 glorious days seeing everything from the Pantheon to the Temple of Zeus. And now we're sitting down for one of our usual early afternoon dinners.
Overlooking
the Pantheon, the Acropolis, right across from us here from our room terrace. And it's gorgeous to be able to see it right here as we're eating.
And I'm happy that I have found the fish of my youth. It's a scumbria. I didn't expect to find something like that here, but it is wonderful. So anyway, we're going to drink to it. Cheers to us and to Greece and to everybody else.
And the Acropolis.
And the Acropolis. Northwest of Acropolis is Agora. Agora was a central public space in ancient Greek city-states. It was used for assemblies, markets, spiritual and political life of the city. There are ruins of many buildings in Agora, but 2 structures stand out: Temple of Hephaestus and the reconstructed Stoa of Attalus. First, the temple. The Doric temple of Hephaestus was finished in 415 BC and is well preserved because it was used as St. George Church until 1834. The Stoa of Attalus was built by and named after King Attalus II of Pergamon, who ruled between 159 and 138 BC. Stoa is a covered walkway or portico used for civic and commercial purposes. It was fully reconstructed in 1952 and now houses the Agora Museum. In the museum, we are witnessing an arrival of a newly discovered statue.
Emperor Hadrian loved the Greek culture. He frequently visited Greece. There are several places in Athens bearing his name. Here is the Library of Hadrian. It was built around 132 AD. In the library, only part of the western wall, framed by the Corinthian columns, is still standing. Between the Library of Hadrian and the slopes of Acropolis is the Roman Forum with the Tower of the Winds at the eastern edge of it. The Forum was built in the 1st century BC and has not yet been fully excavated. The Wikipedia says that the Tower of the Winds, built around 50 BC, is considered to be the world's first meteorological station. It's a combination of sundials, a water clock, and a wind vane. East of Acropolis is the remnants of the once colossal Temple of Olympian Zeus. Construction began in the Archaic period, in the 6th century BC, but was only completed during the reign of Hadrian. It had 104 gigantic columns and is renowned as the largest temple in Greece. 16 of the columns are still standing. Near the temple is the Ark of Hadrian, with the rock of Acropolis in the background.
A short walk from the Temple of Zeus is an ancient stadium. It was built in 330 BC, primarily for Panathenaic Games, a combination of religious festival and athletic competitions. By 144 BC, it was rebuilt entirely in marble and had a capacity of 50,000 seats. The stadium was excavated in 1869 and hosted the first modern Olympics in 1896, and once again in 2004. On the day we went to the Archaeological Museum, my wife got a present from a taxi driver, a nice bouquet of laurel and poppy flowers. The Archaeological Museum is full of interesting objects. There are several that are especially beautiful. Here is the famous bronze statue of Zeus. And this is a bit younger, 340 BC statue of youth holding a round object.
It is the next morning and we're going to see an ancient Doric temple of Poseidon in Sanya, an hour and a half bus ride from Athens. This 440 BC temple is on a cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea. Sixteen out of the 38 columns are standing today. For the next couple of days, we're going to stay at the seashore of Peloponnesus to see a large, well-preserved Greek theater in ancient Epidaurus. Back in the States, we reserved a small hotel called Angelica Villas, and what a wonderful surprise this place is. A local family manages several 2-3-story small structures while living in one of them. The villas are on a hill overlooking the sea. It is soaked in beautiful flowers and singing birds. In the morning, the owner and her helper serve the breakfast. It's something else. The beach is a 5-minute slow walk downhill. In the evening, we're going down to the small village to have a nice seafood dinner. The nights are also gorgeous. Next morning, we're in the ancient Epidaurus at the sanctuary of Asclepius, the god of medicine. Currently, archaeologists are reconstructing the Dorian tholos of Epidaurus, which is assumed to be the place of sacrifice to Asclepius. Near the sanctuary is one of the largest well-preserved ancient Greek theaters. It was built at the end of the 4th century BC, has a capacity of 14,000, and is considered to be the most perfect Greek theater with regard to acoustics and aesthetics. In 1955, as an annual festival of ancient drama, Greece re-established theatrical performances in this theater.
After Epidaurus, we turn our attention to ancient Olympia. The Wikipedia says that Olympia was a major pan-Hellenic religious sanctuary of ancient Greece, where ancient Olympic Games were held. The site was primarily dedicated to Zeus and was one of a group of such pan-Hellenic centers which helped build the identity of the ancient Greeks as a nation. The games were held from the 8th century BC to the 4th century AD. The site housed many temples as well as treasuries, altars, statues, and other structures dedicated to many deities. The main temple of Zeus survives only as stones on the ground, but there are 2 temples which are slightly better preserved. The Philippian is the Ionic circular tholos dedicated to Philip, father of Alexander the Great. It was the only structure inside the sanctuary dedicated to a human. The archaic Doric temple of Hera was built around 600 BC. In modern times, the torch of the Olympic flame is lit in its ruins. Walking through the arch called crypt, we enter the ancient stadium. Near the site is the Olympia Museum, which holds excavated east and west pediments of the Temple of Zeus. Among other artifacts of the museum is the famous statue of Hermes, holding the infant Dionysus in his left arm.
To get from Olympia to Delphi, we drive north along the west coast of the Peloponnese Peninsula. Then we take the Rhine-Adrian Bridge across the Gulf of Corinth. Throughout our trip, we meet a lot of bell-carrying goats. Those on the steep hill over the road, for some reason, do not fall down. That is where the famous Greek goat cheese comes from. As we get closer to Delphi on the slope of Mountain Parnassus, we are passing what looks like a never-ending olive orchard. When we reached the town, we realized it was not just an orchard, but a sea of olive trees. The trees are in the valley of the river Pleistos. It seems that in the ancient times, the river had been much wider, but nowadays it has water mainly in the winter and dries out in the summer. A couple of 100 yards from the town, on the slope of the mountain, is the archaeological site of ancient Delphi. Delphi was the sanctuary that grew rich and famous as the seat of Sibyl, the oracle that was consulted about important decisions throughout the classical world. The ancient Greeks considered the center of the world to be here, marked by the stone known as omphalos, the navel. The presumed original is in the Delphi Museum. Throughout the sanctuary there were many statues and numerous treasuries. These were built by the city-states to commemorate the victories and thank the oracle for her advice. One of them, the now restored Athenian treasury, was built to commemorate their victory over Persia in the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. The main temple of the sanctuary is the 4th century BC Doric Temple of Apollo, which was built over the remnants of the earlier structure. In 1896, at the Temple of Apollo, archaeologists found the now famous statue of the charioteer. It is considered to be one of the finest examples of ancient bronze sculptures. And here is the rock of the oracle. With all this climbing, one has to rest a bit, but there is one more place to see here in Delphi. A short walk from the main archaeological site is the sanctuary of Athena Pronaia, with the famous Tholos of Delphi. It is a circular 4th century BC Doric temple with 3 reconstructed columns. The visitors from Athens would have first seen this sanctuary as they approached Delphi.
Next, we hop on a ship and visit 2 Aegean islands, Santorini and Melos. The official name of this island in the southern Aegean Sea is Thera. It is the largest island of a small circular archipelago of a volcanic caldera. The island was named Santorini by the Latin Empire in the 13th century. It is a combination of 2 words, saint and Irene. It is a beautiful island, but the number of tourists deposited daily from the cruise ships makes it very difficult to enjoy its beauty. A boat ride from Santorini is the island of Melos. We like the island. The main town Plaka is very nice. Many beaches are nested at white cliffs with a very unusual coast. And what is also very attractive, this island doesn't have as many tourists as Santorini. The island is also known because of this lady, Venus de Milo. She has her home at the Louvre. The sculpture was created somewhere around 115 BC and was found in 1820 by a peasant digging for marble to sell. The spot has a plaque at the place he found it and a description of the event near the site.
The Ionian coast of Anatolia, now Turkey, was the home of some of the most important city-states of ancient Greece. Ephesus was the grandest of them all. Its origins are traced to 1600 BC. It was the home to one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Temple of Artemis. One reassembled column is all that remains of the temple now, but here are a couple of reconstruction images of what it must have looked like in antiquity. Entering through the southern gate, we're getting a good feeling of this sprawling city. To our right is the theater-shaped Boleterion, the city council meeting place. Slightly down the street is the Memmius Monument. The governor of Asia, Memmius, built the monument with 3 statues depicting himself, his father, and his grandfather dictator Sulla. Following the curved street, we pass by the fountain dedicated to Emperor Trajan. And then the Temple of Hadrian. As always, the great attraction here is the Roman latrine area. 30 years ago, when my husband was much younger and much sillier, he also visited this place. Now we are told that recently, one overweight gentleman fell into the sewer below, which prompted roping off the place. Everywhere around us, the archaeologists are working on restoring the city. At the end of the curved street is the famous Celsus Library. Turning right from the library along the marble street, we reach the ancient theater. Across the theater is the platform with a view of the street of Arcadius, all the way to ancient harbor. In the end, we wish we could spend more time in this famed city of the ancient world. So much more to see.
Byzantium was founded in 657 BC on the western side of the Strait of Bosphorus, between the Black and the Mediterranean Sea. It has an excellent natural harbor called Golden Horn at an important location between Europe and Asia. In 324 AD, Roman Emperor Constantine decided to establish a new capital of Roman Empire at Byzantium, which later became known as Constantinople. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, Constantinople became the capital of the Christian Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire. With its ups and downs, it lasted for the next 1100 years until the Ottoman Turks under Mehmed II captured the city in 1453. The city is now a part of Turkey and is known as Istanbul. In 330 AD, Constantine built his imperial palace at the new capital of the empire. The Great Palace of Constantinople, as it was called, was located between Hippodrome and St. Sophia Cathedral. There is nothing that remains from the Great Palace today. In its place is the Sultan Ahmed Mosque. In 1930s and 50s, archaeologists discovered some of the palace mosaics. They are now at the Great Palace Mosaic Museum. Two obelisks are all that remains from the Hippodrome. One of them is the Egyptian obelisk, which was built in 1500 BC and was brought here in 390 AD by Constantine. The other is usually referred to as a column of Constantine Porphyrogenitus, after the emperor who restored it in the 10th century. In the 5th century AD, at the southern end of the Great Palace by the Sea of Marmara, Emperor Theodosius II built the summer palace of the Byzantine emperors, called Bucolion. Currently, there is a plan to restore the palace as an open-air museum. The last residence of Byzantine emperors, starting from the 13th century, was the Palace of Porphyrogenitus. It was opened as a museum in June 2019.
The famous Constantinople city walls, which were finished by Theodosius III in 413 AD, protected the capital for almost 1,000 years. The walls had 3 levels of fortification with regular interval towers and a 66-foot wide moat. The inner wall was 40 feet tall and 20 feet thick. We found a good taxi driver who helped us film the Theodosian walls.
Sorry, I can't speak English little, sorry. That's okay. Thanks.
Here are several well-preserved wall towers. The so-called seawall enclosed the city on the sides of the Sea of Marmara and the Gulf of the Golden Horn.
And now, the churches of Constantinople. First, St. Sophia, Hagia Sophia in Turkish or Hagia Sophia in Greek. The Wikipedia states that the cathedral was built in 537 AD at the beginning of the Middle Ages. It was famous in particular for its massive dome. It was the world's largest building and an engineering marvel of its time. It is considered the epitome of Byzantine architecture and is said to have changed the history of architecture. It remained the world's largest cathedral for nearly 1,000 years until Seville Cathedral was completed in 1520. Unfortunately, people being as we are, the cathedral was not left as intended. It was first converted into a Catholic church during the Crusader invasion from 1204 to 1261, and then from 1453 used as a mosque for almost 500 years. It was opened as a museum in 1935. And here is the second floor of the cathedral. The second floor has several excellent frescoes and mosaics. St. Sophia at night with Sultan Ahmed III fountain in the foreground. A short walk south from Hippodrome is the Little St. Sophia. Built a couple of years before, it was a prototype of its bigger sister. North of St. Sophia, just inside the Sultan's Topkapi Palace grounds, is the church predating both St. Sophia churches. St. Irene was built by Constantine in 337 AD and served as a church of patriarchate before St. Sophia was completed. Today, due to its extraordinary acoustic characteristics, St. Irene serves mainly as a concert hall for classical music performances. And finally, when one is in Istanbul, one must see the Kora Church, now a museum. It is in the northwestern part of the city, all the way near the walls of Constantinople. It is being restored now and is under canopy. The frescoes and mosaics depicting biblical passages are breathtaking. The interior of the building is covered with some of the oldest and finest surviving Byzantine stone mosaics and frescoes.
Greece was an important part of the Byzantine Empire. In Athens and across Peloponnesus, there are many places with buildings tracing their roots to that period. In 1262, the Crusader state, Latin Empire, was defeated, resulting in the restoration of the Byzantine Empire. Mistras became the seat of the territory of the Morea governor. Later, the governor was usually the heir apparent of the Byzantine emperor. It's a good climb, but we're finally reaching the governor's palace, the last phase of which dates to 1415. Most of the monasteries and churches we see below date to the 14th and 15th century. We first visit the church of St. Demetrius. Then we're reaching the church of St. Theodorus. Next is the functioning Pantanassa monastery with 7 nuns and a lady working at the church. We felt uncomfortable to intrude, but in hindsight we should have chatted and filmed one of the nuns that we met there. It's not all climbing. There are some picturesque parts of the trail. There's also a castle on the top of that hill, but at this point we are all climbed out for today.
Monumental is located on a small island off the coast of Peloponnesus. We are at the coast, and it is clear why the name is Monumental. Mone and Envasia are 2 Greek words meaning single entrance. The island is linked to the mainland by a single 330-yard causeway. Our destination is a hotel address in town. A pleasant female voice from Google Maps is telling us to proceed across the causeway. We comply, and as we drive by the water around the mountain, we get to this gate. The pleasant voice concludes, "You have arrived." We burst out laughing. We are not in town, and there is definitely no hotel here. It turns out that the town's narrow medieval streets can be traversed only on foot. We park our car on the side of the mountain and are rolling our suitcases a quarter of a mile to the hotel. We later found out that one can hire a porter for €5. The town was founded in 583 AD by the inhabitants of the mainland seeking refuge from the Slavic and Avaric invasion of Greece. It is a jewel. Momenvasia is nested on the side of the mountain, and on the other three sides is enclosed by a high wall. It has several terraces of streets, which are slowly being restored. On the plateau-type top of the mountain, there are ruins of the fortress and a church. We're planning our trip to the top later, but first we are going to walk through this gorgeous little town. As we enter the gate, we are in the main street full of little restaurants and shops. But just a turn from the main street are the streets of the lower and upper terraces. And this is the main square of the town with Pania Christifitissa Church. From the porch of our hotel room and from the cafe in front of the hotel, there is a nice view of the Aegean. Most of the restaurants in town are also facing the sea, and as we dine, we can enjoy the view. Today is the time to get up the mountain to the ruins of the fortress. There are several narrow trails on the side of the mountains below the rock wall, but only one clear way to get to the top, and it is steep. But it is worth it for the vista alone. At the northeastern end of the plateau, at the edge of the cliff, is the 12th century St. Sophia Church.
We're saying goodbye to Greece, land of ancient civilizations, beautiful Byzantine churches, and soulful songs.
Βρήκα πάλι ξαφνικά να πίνει σούζο στο Λευτέρι. Νύχτα δεν θα έρθει σ' άλλα μέρη, να έχεις δικά σου μυστικά, να έχεις δικά σου